Yep. Yeah, okay. Tell me when you're ready. I'm just... That's okay. I'm going to move this one down a little bit.
Well, just make sure you tell us.
We're almost ready. I think they're just getting the AV set up. How you doing, man? Good to see you. Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, hey, thanks for coming. We're going to talk about some embedded security stuffs. My name is DeMott, and first I just want to say thanks to past and present peers, people that have influenced me. I think it's always good to start out a talk by kind of expressing your thankfulness to the community and all those you work with and your great customers and everything like that. The con organizers, security community in general. Love all you guys. And, you know, Trevor forget, right? If you haven't stopped by our booth, we got some cool little Trevor magnets at the VDA booth. So you got to check that out and see if you can score one of those. So this year's talk is just a little bit different than other years. A lot of the other years I've given really sort of down in the weeds, talking about like IDA Pro versus Binary Ninja and Windows 10 bypass exploits and all this kind of stuff. This year's a little bit... it's still pretty technical, but it's a little bit up from that, I guess, in terms of just taking a broader look at some of the things that we see in the industry as we do some of the work that we do. So I just thought I'd kind of throw that out there for what that's worth. So who am I? I've been in the industry for 17 years or more. Lots changed. We're pretty much still as vulnerable as we've always been, though, and we'll kind of see that throughout this talk. Basically, when you think about specific things that have gotten better, like we know how to make things hard to hack. Like when you look at applications that run in Windows 10, you know, their DEP and ASLR and all this device guard and sandboxes and, you know, putting things in VMs or whatever. You can really do it, but we're rolling out new tech at a rate that's faster than basically, you know, those can be applied. So that's kind of one of the interesting things that I see as I look across the industry and see what's in there. I'm the founder of VDA Labs, so like I said, we have a booth here. Check it out. I also have a bunch of courses on Pluralsight. If you want to get a coupon, a free like 90-day access or whatever, I have a bunch of those with me. You can come up and grab one after. So please do that. Because that's kind of one of the takeaways from this talk is basically, you know, I'll talk about some things that obviously have some issues, and then some of the fixes really are you guys, right? Is going out and making sure that developers understand it and people who roll out the technology understand it, and so all the pieces of the process become more secure, and some of that you can learn about there. So I still teach at various locations, at conferences and at DSU, and don't hold it against me, but former NSA, long time ago, had a good time there. It's not as weird as the media makes it sound, okay? Just so you know, it's actually a pretty cool place to work and stuff like that. So it's not it's not like the Snowden movie. If you know, anything you see on TV, pretty much, it's not that. All right, so what am I going to be talking about today? Well, first I'm just going to talk about what is, and just real briefly, what's a typical pen test look like, and what are some of the things that you might see that really weren't supposed to be part of that. Right? What's in scope but out of scope, right? What are some things you might find on a pen test that really you weren't necessarily hired to look at in terms of security testing, hacking, that kind of stuff? And give some examples of those. And then, of course, give some recommendations around how to fix them. So, all right. A typical corporate pen test might include things like the external hacking, internal apps, wireless, physical, social engineering, all this kind of stuff, right? That's you know, part of a typical pen test, but a lot of times the IT department might not necessarily be in charge of the smart building controllers, or cameras, or stuff that really facilities kind of control. So that's part of what this talk is about, is what about all that other stuff? All your embedded systems. Does your IT security team secure those? Do they know about them? Are they aware of them? Some are, some aren't. And so this talk is really kind of raising awareness around some of the technologies and things that are out there that maybe need to be looked at a little closer to make sure that they're secured, because they're not particularly hard to secure. It just needs to get done. And in many cases, it's not. So basically, what falls under IT and IT security really matters. If all your stuff doesn't flow through that channel to get secured, you've got Bob in facilities who's supposed to be securing the cameras or something. Maybe he doesn't know about IT security, right? Because he's the building guy, he's the facilities guy. He's not really even trained in IT, much less security. So that's kind of part of this is talking about that. The other thing is just raising awareness more around IoT. some of the things that are out there. So Atlas Talk, if you were for his last session, he was talking about some of the things that he's seen in the IoT space. And so we'll kind of build on that and talk about some things as well, really. And IoT is really cool. I'm super excited about it. It's literally the most transformative thing that's going to happen to the world since the internet, right? Think about the idea that IoT brings you. You have this notion that Lowe's could call you up and say, hey, there's a snowstorm coming Monday. We see that your snow thrower has a spark plug that's about to go bad. We're going to ship you a new spark plug because your snow thrower is communicating with Lowe's. IoT. That's what IoT means. It's the things that now can communicate with something on the internet. And the amount of literally transformative technologies and ideas and concepts that could come from that are extraordinary. I mean, imagine smart buildings. Smart buildings are, all the technologies here to do smart buildings, or they're just not really being done yet. But you could have a smart building that as soon as you pull into the parking lot, it senses your phone, it tells you where to park, you get in the building, it knows, to adjust the temperature of your office to the way you like it, shows you where to get coffee. I mean, there's no limit to what we could do with IoT and cameras, facial recognition. You walk in a building, biometrics, it lets you through the door. You don't even have to badge in, right? Because it sees you. There's no limit to the amount of cool things that could be done from that. Now, the flip side, though, for us is like, that's kind of terrifying, right? That my building recognizes me and it tells me, it lets me in because it's recognizing my face. And is it being secured? How secure is all that stuff? And how private is it either, for that matter? There's some privacy and security concerns potentially with all that. So it's our job as the sort of security industry people to tackle that world, right? To try to make that whole thing that's coming, whether we want it or not, that stuff's coming. It's our job to try to secure it, right? And kind of add insight and sort of be a guiding light in that process. So, I think it's great. I'm really excited about IoT. What's not as exciting from a security standpoint, there's a lot of problems, right? And so even though we haven't really fully gotten to smart buildings, where some of the pieces are out there, right? A watch that can monitor your health, cameras that are on the internet. It's all kind of hodgepodge right now. It's not really fully tied together, but all the pieces exist. And a lot of the pieces are outdated, old, and not being properly secured. Some of the biggest problems that we still see are very basic vulnerabilities like default credentials. And that made sense in a time, right? In a time when the person drives up with their van and their tool belt and they plug into the, whatever, they knew the password to get into it, to fix it, to work on it, to set it up. And that made sense before those things were on the internet. Now they're on the internet. Now it doesn't make sense, right? It's really scary. So, change the passwords is step one, right? To securing anything on the internet. Make sure it doesn't have default credentials. Now, that's just the first step, right? Beyond that, once you do that, you'll still realize that these devices still have buffer overflows and cross-site scripting, SQL injections, and all the other vulnerabilities. You're going to have problems with those too, and you're going to have to go the next layer, but at least do the basics, and that's not always being done. I'll show some funny examples of that. So the other thing is, when you go to pen test an embedded system, an IoT, a camera, a building controller, whatever it may be, it takes a little more digging in because there's not necessarily as much culture around it. When you come to do a typical corporate pen test, you expect that your pen testers know about certain things. They know how to use, Metasploit, and they know about a Windows domain, and they know all this stuff, right? You hire a pen tester to pen test your car, your auto. We've done some auto work at VDA. It's really fun. But there's a lot of learning involved because it's not necessarily stuff that you could potentially come pre-knowing all the things, right? It may be very specific, not only to a certain industry, but to a certain company in that industry. So there's a lot of knowledge there, and there's not quite as much security tooling, right? You're having a problem with your laptop, you can pick an AV, right? And you feel better about that now. Does it mean that you're secure just because you installed AV, right? Or something like that, next-gen endpoint security? You're actually adding attack surface to your laptop, right? So it could actually be adding problems, but most people would agree you're making it better, right? You're keeping it fully patched, you're using industry best standards to have antivirus, which is good. So overall it's good, and there's some tooling and there's some process and knowledge about that. There are some risks, but overall it's good. We don't really have that in other industries. Like, do you want to load Norton on your car? I kind of don't want to do that. I'm afraid that it's going to make it slow and crash, because that's what it did to my computer. But maybe that's the future, right? Maybe we have to do that because it turns out that all these domains are very complex. All these things, from your camera to your fridge to whatever, they're running a lot of code. In many cases, it's more code than, even the original designers probably realized. They're probably like, hey, let's do, this smart thing on the fridge so we can tap and, let Meyer know where your groceries are or something. And then they realize, oh, to do that, we have to add this IP stack, and oh, let's run it on Linux, and oh, by the way, that's a really old version, it's outdated Linux, but oh well. There's this whole process that goes into it that's kind of terrifying, right? And it kind of builds on itself. So we have to make sure that that stuff is either securable, or isolated, or locked down in such a way that we either can contain it, or we have to create security tooling around it, which is kind of terrifying, because that would raise the cost and just add complexity. So that's something that we don't necessarily want to do, but we might have to. So the other thing about that, of course, is that cyber war kind of just got real, right? In the past, it was all about, hey, I'm going to hack your server, steal your credit cards, and now I got a bunch of stuff. Cool. With IoT, it's more like, hey, I'm going to hack your building, turn up the boiler over the weekend when you're not there, and burn it down and kill you. That's a different story. That's a little more scary to me. I can get a new credit card. It's not a big deal if you lose your card, right? Let's be honest. I mean, people talk about it like the end of the world. It's not really the end of the world. You can get a new card. If you kill me, that sucks. It's hard to deal with that. It's hard to remediate that one. So cyberware is really interesting around IoT. So there's a lot of things in that space that piqued my interest, and I really wanted to look into them. So what are some examples? Okay, so I've been talking a lot. Let me show you some very funny and interesting examples. So this is one particular camera system that we've run into a lot. It's called Exact Vision. We didn't know a lot about it when we first saw it, but we've run into it. And basically, if you click on the box on the left, you get a view like this. You're just like in somebody's camera system, right? And it's actually a camera controller. The pictures aren't very good. I'm sorry about that. This projector, unfortunately, is very low res. These are actually very nice high-res pictures. But anyway, that's besides the point. So basically, this system's really interesting. You're not just be able to look in the camera views, but you can do some things to it. What can you do to it? Well, let's take a look. So first thing you can do is you can see every camera attached to it as well. Both the version, the firmware, what type of camera it is, stuff like that. That's kind of interesting. So you could go and research those cameras too. Is this system hard to find on the internet? Not really. Have you ever heard of Shodan.io? It's kind of an interesting website. If you've never gone to it, you should go check it out. There's a particular query you can type in and you can find lots of interesting stuff. Basically, what's cool about Shodan is that it gives you like stuff that's already been found on the internet. In the past, you had to go in and scan systems yourself, right? You had to run Nmap and Nessus and whatever, and you had to kind of like find your own vulnerabilities, your own systems. So there was some potential. Come in and sit down, people, if you want. There's a lot of seats over here, unless you like to stand. There's plenty of seats all through back here. But you kind of had to do some legwork. With Shodan, it's basically like, hey, we've already scanned the internet. There's a lot of stuff. Just search for what you want. It's kind of like the Google of Nmap or something. So it's pretty cool. So you can find these systems, and you can find a lot about them once you attach to them in many cases. Like, oh, here's all the different camera views, and here's different views of different buildings. Here's like, a whole solar farm, and you can look at different views of this. They're all on the internet. Why are they on the internet? I don't know. It's one of the things about IoT I kind of wanted to point out and embed it to you guys. So you realize that a lot of these things are not being secured in the way that they should be. I mean, you could like check out a dairy farm. If you're into watching cows get born, I don't know, it's not my thing. I'm not really into that, but you can find views of that on the internet if you're into that, right? It's kind of weird. So this is actually a view from inside a Mercedes-Benz dealer of a lady processing paperwork as somebody's buying a car. It's on the internet. Why is it on the internet? I bet the people who buy Mercedes-Benz don't want their paperwork being looked at by somebody in a different country on the internet, right? It's kind of bad. This one, I like the next one particularly. It's one of my favorites because you ever like call up a dealer and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. DeMott, we can't get to your car for like 2 more weeks or whatever, something like that. And you're like, ain't nobody doing nothing in bays 1 through 4. Come on, fix my car. It's accountability. It's not hacking. That's all what this is. But I guess that's why they left it on the internet, kind of full disclosure or something. I'm not sure. So this is just I've got some rolling video of some other places. This is a school. This is like, a business place. It's hard to see some of these pictures. They're pretty good res, but this is manufacturing. You've got inside like break rooms. You've got inside somebody's private home. Here's like $1 million house. It's on the internet. Here's like, your tractor bay. Here's a pool. Many different camera views from private homes to nursing homes to schools to a girls' soccer team playing, on a field that you can just kind of check out what they're up to. It's really weird. This one was really interesting too. So this was actually from a jewelry store. It's on the internet. Their cameras are on the internet. You can watch people shopping, buying jewelry. You can actually take control of the cameras and zoom in too, right? And like look at somebody's credit card closely or the transaction happening as it's happening. It's really bad. It's really bad. So these type of systems shouldn't be on the internet with default credentials, right? I think everybody would agree with me on that. And so I kind of like to tell people, like, if you're a weirdo, if you're a peeping Tom or a creeper, like, you were born at the right time, man. This is your day. This is your time to shine. This is it for you. Because there's a lot of weird stuff out there. So go ahead and, no, don't do that. Go help people fix this stuff is what we need to do, right? That's what this whole talk is all about, is trying to encourage people to get out there and make some positive changes and fix it. So what's kind of crazy about this system, though, to tell you some more interesting stories about it, is it's not just the fact that you can look through the cameras. You can like see who the admins are. You could add accounts, change accounts. We were doing a test a while ago, and we happened to stumble across the fact that there was a local county jail that had their cameras on the internet. You could see inmates sleeping in their cell, and then it dawned on me, wait, this is worse than just being able to watch somebody. Like, if you were going to attack that jail, you could shut the cameras down first and then attack, right? So you could actually it makes me wonder how many actual physical crimes have been committed with the help of cyber hacking. Basically somebody, disabling those jewelry store cameras before they rotted. Like, that's terrifying to me. And so, if you run any kind of business and you have cameras or you have cameras in your personal home, you need to make sure that they're not on the internet with default credentials, okay? That's plain and simple. There's probably other issues besides that, but you gotta at least do the basics, right? What if you're like, well, I'm not really into looking through cameras, but that's an expensive system and I do want to use it. You can just find the license key too. You could steal somebody's key. You could also see what kind of system, like an outdated version of Win 7, is running that server. So you could use it as a way to sort of fingerprint the system that's on a private network that exposed publicly. That's really bad. So there's a lot of really bad stuff about that. This is showing the camera and the firmware that's connected to it. Whew. All right, so I changed the password. Goodness gracious, thank you. I'm safe now, right? I'm perfectly safe because I at least, I changed the password so nobody knows the password to my system. That's good. It's a good start. Well, what's weird about that particular camera system is you can still attach to it and be connected to a private network from the internet, even without the password. You just can't look into cameras. The password only uses to enforce who gets to see into the cameras. It's very bizarre. It's an old system. Now, in fairness, I will say that when you talk to the vendor, they'll say, well, that was a previous version of our software and stuff like that. Like if you bought today's latest, it wouldn't have that problem. I know, but here's the problem. People bought this system thinking it was going to last 10 years. They didn't know they had to refresh it every year, right? So the problem is a lot of these systems live on forever and ever and ever. So you have an old version of it now, it's going to be old for 10 years maybe. Hopefully not. Hopefully you could at least patch it if you knew to. But how many people know to? What's the last time you patched your home cable modem router thingy, updated the firmware, flash? Some people do, some people don't. Most people wouldn't know to do that, right? Your grandma doesn't know to do that, just so you know. And a lot of the people that install these camera systems, the kind of, quote unquote, facilities technicians, they don't know that either, in most cases. So, I did a CVS search for vulnerabilities that are known against that system, and I found none. And I was like, whew, man, I feel so much better, because I was starting to think that system might not be all that secure. No! I'm terrified by that, right? Why am I terrified by that? I'm terrified by that because that means nobody cares enough about that system to report anything to the vendor, and the vendor isn't apparently letting people know about issues either. So it's really bad. If you've got a product in your network with 0 known CVEs against it, you need to talk to your vendor, because you got a problem, right? If you have a vendor telling you, hey, we've never had security vulnerabilities in our firewall or our AV software or whatever, because our stuff is good, it's secure, we don't have problems like that, you're not getting the real story. What you need to hear is, yes, we've had issues throughout the past. We always, responsibly disclose them. Here's our list of prior CVEs. Here's how you make sure you're on the latest version. That's the reality of software, whether it's security software or regular software, right? So, you need to make sure you're understanding that and diligent about that. So we thought, boy, there's no CVEs. We better have a quick peek at the firmware, just to make sure that there are, in fact, no CVEs against this thing. So we went to download the firmware, and the vendor makes sure that you can't do that. You have to have a user and password to get the firmware. So that helped a lot. I couldn't get it. So that kept hackers from doing any damage to your product by enforcing a user and pass on the website. Unless you're good at Google, in which case you can find a user and pass to that website right there. And then you can download the firmware and check it out. See if there's any vulnerabilities. Oh, cool. Okay, interesting. So pretend that we did actually find some vulnerabilities in that system beyond default user and past creds. What do you do with that? Well, ideally, there's this thing called coordinated disclosure. That's the new term. It used to be called responsible disclosure. People have gotten away from that term because it basically means you get to give your goodies for free to somebody and they don't have to help you in any way. Coordinated disclosure means that they'll recognize you, they'll at least throw you a t-shirt, or maybe they'll give you a bug bounty, or there'll be some recognition that, hey, I'm doing your QA for you, you know, throw me a bone, basically, right? So that's why the term has changed from responsible disclosure to coordinated disclosure. So the idea, or I guess my advice to vendors in that sense, is make that process as seamless as possible, right? Make sure that on your company website there's a secure@company.com, or like it's easy, like for researchers to know how to get a hold of you, right? Because if it's like, hey, you know, we found some stuff in your thing, and oh, why are you looking at our thing? My lawyer will be in contact soon. Like that was 20 years ago, people. Like if that's what if your vendor still is hostile toward researchers, that's really bad. Because that means that researchers are not going to be motivated to submit issues they find to your company and to your product, right? So you want to make sure that it's seamless, easy, and hopefully somewhat rewarding to the researchers if they do find something that you can basically make sure that that's taken care of quickly. So outside of that system, if you wanted to just find the cameras themselves, the views of the cameras, a lot of those are on the internet too. There's lots of open cameras on the internet. Use Shodan, you can find them. Same thing, you can find the firmware for this particular camera. You can register, download it. And there have been people that have done this in the past, certainly we're not the first, and have found vulnerabilities and tried to do exactly what I just said, tried to submit a vulnerability to the vendor. In this case, there was a researcher who found that there was a Chinese company making these cheap commodity cameras, right? Sort of the $50 cameras you buy off Amazon type thing. They're all made in China. Which is fine if they're being made securely, right? But, you know, whenever something's being made on a super tight budget, you just wonder if they're doing anything with security. This researcher tried to contact him, couldn't get any kind of response at all, and eventually just dropped the vulnerability on the internet is basically what happened. So that's not good. So when you see any other type of embedded devices out there, you know, what are some other ways that we could look at researching them? What kind of other devices basically might we see? Well, there's lots of examples besides just cameras. Cameras is just one kind of interesting example because it's very intimate to people, right? It's very scary that somebody could be watching your kid in their crib or whatever. But there's lots of other things. Like we've seen solar panels. This is one particular brand and vendor that we've seen. A lot of times, again, default creds. You find them on the internet, punch in admin as the password, and you're in. Oh, cool, I'm in. Oh, here's the private IP address that it's connected to. Here's all this crazy data. That's not good. So you want to make sure that if you do have any systems like this as well, any kind of embedded IoT, that's really the whole point of this talk, is not just cameras, right? It's not a focus on cameras. It's if you've got these solar panels, you can find those on Shodan as well. And you should probably do that. You should probably try to find anything that your company has on the internet, just in case somehow it is accidentally exposed. Because what happens a lot of times in a pen test is you're given a tight scope. Like you get to look at IPs X through Y. Well, some of these devices, they may be connected to a cable modem or something like that, and they're on the internet, but they're not in your normal corporate range, right? So your pen testers won't find them unless they know to look for them. So they're on some other range. So that's kind of one of the places where Shodan can really be useful, is finding things that might not be in your block that really belong to you. Because hackers don't care what's in your block. They'll find them. They'll just use Shodan, right? In many cases, they're not even looking for anybody in particular. They're just looking for particular vulnerable systems they know about so they can hack them. Okay. So when it comes to smart buildings, I kind of already gave the example of, you know, coffee and music and biometrics and energy efficient. They're really cool, right? You have the potential for these buildings to be extremely energy efficient. And that's one of the coolest things about smart buildings to me, is not just that they could help you find the right, you know, available open office for the day or your meeting, or adjust the music or the temperature, all that, but the fact that they could use solar, or maybe they only water when they really need to if the soil is really dry. The fact that they can be so much more energy efficient. It's very cool technology. There's a lot of companies like Johnson Controls, Schneider Electric. The people at Johnson Controls are really cool, by the way. I've talked to them about some of the stuff, and they know that, you know, they need to continue to build on their security programs to do better in a lot of ways, and they are. So they're really digging into that. It's really cool. So those are some of the vendors you might run into. And basically, what a smart building, a little more on that, is in the past, you had all this disparate systems, right? You had your closed circuit TV for your cameras, you had, maybe a fire alarm system, all this kind of stuff, but they were all on different sort of industrial-like networks if they were networked at all. And so over time, they've collapsed to basically one data network, which is really cool, because that means that there's the potential for one guy in some room to be able to look at all the things related to your building, your campus, your entire thing, and go, oh, there's a window open here, there's a fire thing there, there's an event with this or that, or, you can really centrally manage it so much better. You could send alarms and alerts and log data to your SIM tool. You could do so much more. That's really cool, if it's being done. And this is a screenshot of a YouTube video you can find on Schneider Electric on their products. So there's a lot of information available to you. You can go and learn about all these different products and kind of read about them. So one of the we've seen a lot of different building controllers actually as we've done tests throughout the years, and one that we've seen is by Schneier. And it's funny when you read through some of their older documentation, if you find the documentation for the version you're looking at, you can tell that it's dated, right? And again, these systems were meant to live for a long time. So one of the paragraphs that was funny to me in this documentation was, this system provides high level of guarantee security, basically, like this is a super secure system. To run it, you're going to need IE6 and a really old version of Java. And I was like, boy, one of those two can't be true, and I'm pretty sure I know which one it is. Right? So it's just kind of an LOL moment, right? So I got an old version of Java, spun up an old VM with a really old browser and stuff like that, and connected to this device, which, if you look at some of their diagrams, they even show you basically like, this is a backdoor to your network. Like, here's your network, here's the cable modem that allows you to like enter your building controller. And so that's kind of funny to me alone. So basically, you look at some of the technical diagrams for some of these smart buildings, it's like, wow, this is really complicated stuff. I don't understand any of it. But there's a little blue E on a laptop. I'm pretty sure I know what that means, right? So that basically gives you some insight that maybe that's a way you could connect to that thing. Cool. So, this is what Google says the guys look like that set those systems up. I don't know if that's right, but I trust Google, whatever. So they come in and they set up and they have all this special equipment, but they're probably not cybersecurity experts, is my guess. I'm not an HVAC expert for that matter, right? So there's a knowledge gap that kind of goes both ways, right? I don't necessarily understand HVAC systems. They don't necessarily understand cybersecurity. Wow. And we see that across everything in our industry, right? So people who used to know auto, they have to learn cybersecurity, yeah. People who deal with financial stuff, they have to learn cybersecurity, yep. People who dealt with like buildings and stuff, yeah. Everybody has to learn it. Oh, that sucks. Yeah, kind of. And for a lot of reasons, because basically it'll raise the cost of living for everybody, because every system gets more complex, and basically everybody has to learn more about everything, which is expensive in terms of time and technology. And it's also just hard to do. Some people aren't interested in cybersecurity, right? I have a quote at the end of my deck where I was talking to a gentleman that works at a credit union, and he's like, man, I really miss the days of like when auditing meant like they came in and they looked at our paper and stuff like that, and like, I don't want to learn cybersecurity. That sounds really dumb to me. And I was like, well, you're in banking. You probably should learn that. Like, I think it's kind of important. So, again, these systems, they can be found with Shodan. They're on the internet. If you scan them, connect to them, you'll find they have lots of ports open. Like they run a web server, which is kind of interesting. There's also some weird stuff about them, like there's a number that apparently if you lost your user and pass, you can give them that number and they can help you recover your password, which is kind of terrifying, right? Because it means that there's some sort of reversing that can be done on that. If you connect to them, you'll see just kind of this old cartoonish GUI, and it allows you to like monitor the pool temperature of a house in Italy or something. Not that I did that, because I wouldn't do that. That would be weird. And also, when your client connects to this web app, it basically downloads a bunch of old Java code, so you could audit that. So you could look for vulnerabilities besides default creds, which a lot of them have. Besides that, you could hunt for vulnerabilities in the client or the servers that run on these devices themselves. And it makes me wonder, like, does that device need to run a web server? Like, maybe it does, but it seems like it would be better if most IoT devices were push. Right? Like you have some central console, like a SIM tool or whatever, some central logging thing, and most of those things would push data to you, rather than like, hey, you can connect to me and like query and control my device through a web. And that's how most things right now have a web interface, right? Like your cable modem at home, your camera system, your building control, they all have their own like web server that allows you to configure it, because it makes it point and click GUI, which is cool. I'd like that as from a configuration standpoint. I just wonder how secure that is, because now it's like, well, now the people who build those, they have to know about cross-site scripting and SQL injection and buffer overflow. Like, do they know about all that? Maybe, maybe not, right? So that's kind of the thing we live in. One good thing about this system and others like it is I did find a lot of CVEs against them when I looked. And at first you're like, oh man, these things have had a lot of vulnerabilities, but at least they're being reported and fixed, right? So that's actually kind of encouraging to me. Like that doesn't scare me that I find a lot of vulnerabilities against the systems that you might use. It's kind of nice to know that somebody cares enough to report them and get them fixed. So that was kind of a good thing. And again, the point is they sort of last a long time, right? So that's kind of, if you talk to the vendor, they would say, well, the only reason you found default creds and issues and stuff against that one is because that was yesteryear's model. That was one from a while ago. Yeah, I know. Those are the ones that are out there. Your brand new ones you just built last year, nobody's bought yet, right? So, yes, everyone should buy your latest and greatest and be running everything fully new and fully patched. Agree. But is that the reality of the world we live in? Probably not. Not for a while. It takes time especially for industries like buildings and stuff to get the newest and latest, greatest, shiny. They're not out chasing the latest iPhone like, individual consumers are, right? They're like, what's the cheapest, most cost-effective way to run a building for the next 20 years? That's their mindset. It's a different mindset. Okay, so if you look at their latest models, you'll see that they're different. They've got a little better things. The picture still shows a blue E, which kind of interesting to me. You'll still find recent CVEs against those devices, which isn't surprising. That's still kind of a good thing, I think, that somebody's still looking into them. They're still being secured. So that's a good thing. So whose problem is this, I guess, becomes the question. Is that the manufacturer's problem? Is it their fault that they didn't, make it correctly? Yeah, it is. But is it the facilities people who installed it and never changed the default creds? Yeah, it's their fault too. Is it the IT folks who don't know about it and don't have it being monitored, through their normal network and SIM tool and stuff like the rest of their infrastructure? Yeah, kind of. Right? So basically it's everybody's problem, not fault. I wouldn't blame anybody. I don't know that it's anybody's fault, but it's sort of a shared responsibility is the way I would put it. It takes a cooperation from everybody in the ecosystem to make these things secure, and we can totally do it. It's actually not hard to isolate, separate, secure these type of systems. It just has to get done. So that's really, again, my takeaway. So I talked to Jason at Johnson Controls. He's one of their directors in product security. And this was a quote from him. He said, basically, securing smart buildings is a shared responsibility requiring focus and commitment from the manufacturer, the integrator, and the customer. And that makes sense. I think everybody would agree that that's a true statement. It makes total sense. I think it's a really, it's a good step forward to get that sort of stuff up. How's it going back there? How you feeling? You all right? Okay. Trevor suit? Okay. Are you going to break it out? We'll see about that. Okay. The Trevor suit may or may not come out, depending on a lot of things. So, all right. Anyway, to get the basics right, what do we have to do? Strong passwords, right? Ooh, it's not rocket science, but it needs to get done. Maybe two-factor authentication would be good. That's harder for a lot of these systems because they probably don't allow you to do it by default, but if you could, that would be better. How about not even putting them on the internet if they don't need to be on the internet? That'd be a good step. So segment, isolate. What about if it needs to be on the internet, maybe put it on a VPN tied to a certain IP, something like that. IT best practices have been around 20 years, right? It's not rocket science, but for whatever reason, we kind of find organizations that it's sort of the haves and the have-nots, right? It's like you either have organizations that get it and are doing it, or there's a lot that don't and they're not, right? And there's, of course, stuff in between, but it would be better if more people understood and got it. And then, of course, monitoring these systems just like you would any other asset, keeping them updated. It would be better if all these systems updated themselves, right? Like, why doesn't your camera system or your building control, your HVAC system, why doesn't it download its own updates? It should, I think, but most of them don't. And most of them live forever unpatched. So, that's kind of one of those things. So, yeah, separation again, like, does it need to be on the same subnet that your domain controller's on? Probably not, right? So if you've got a big network, like your camera system or whatever, maybe it can be on its own subnet, isolated, firewalled, right? Makes sense. It's basically best practices. Least privileges, restricted by IP. So defense in depth, physically secure. That's another thing. You can find a lot of these systems just if you're in an airport and you see like a thermostat, look underneath it sometime. You'll see, there's an Ethernet jack or something underneath it. You're on the BACnet network or whatever. You're on some kind of interesting Ethernet, or whatever, depending on how it's set up and configured. So most all of these need to be physically secured as well, because once you have physical access to almost any of these, they kind of assume that it's game over. A lot of times there's some kind of default debug protocol that once you can plug into it physically, you can kind of configure and stuff. So yes, it needs to be physically secured as well. All right, so I already showed you how to find them on Shodan. That'd be a good bet to do in terms of security. Secure update policy, yeah, they need to be updated. So software decays over time. And that's the one thing I think a lot of people still they haven't quite wrapped their head around that, which is, so I made a camera system and I shipped it this year and it's secure. Okay, it's a complex process to figure that out, right? Secure, like nothing's ever 100% secure, but you did the best you could. So how do you determine that? Well, we scanned all the open source components it relies on, component analysis, right? So most things are more assembled than written these days, right? Like if you're going to like engineer a camera and ship it as a product that your company sells, you're probably not going to write 95% of the code. You're going to find an open source library that does video processing, and an open source library that does a web interface, and an open source library or operating system like Linux that has an IP stack and stuff. So you're relying on many of the components that everybody else relies on. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. The problem is, a lot of times these products, they'll take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and they'll kind of Frankenstein it together, and then there's really no move forward update plan. So a year from now, when there's yet another kernel bug found in Linux, how are you going to update your camera? Oh, we didn't think through that. You can't, because it really needs that version of Linux. Oh, that's a problem. That's not good. And we see that a lot, unfortunately. They don't have a good update strategy of how do we continuously update our components and ship patches to our customers. That's something the vendor should be thinking about. They may or may not be. And you can actually do component analysis. There's a lot of good tools out there that allow you to check and see what are all the open source, kind of the bill of materials, kind of the list of ingredients, if you will. Just like when you buy a candy bar, you can see how many sugars and carbs and protein, whatever. You can kind of do that with software nowadays too, right? You can figure out what all the components are. It uses this version of Linux and this version of that library and this version of this library. Oh, by the way, they're all like 3 years old and they all have like 10 known CVEs against them. So your system you just made has 30 vulnerabilities before you even ship it if you're using outdated components, right? That's kind of scary. So as a vendor, we have to make sure that that's not happening. We have to make sure we're doing better than that. And it's easy to do better than that. It's just, is it being done? I don't know. In most cases, not. So, all right. There's this other thing called SDLC, Secure Development Lifecycle. It's been around a while. It's kind of heavyweight. Microsoft does it well. They're a big company. A lot of little companies, they didn't want to be in that business, right? When I talk to people at some of the, in automation and industrial controls and stuff like that, they're like, we kind of set out to make these like hardware widgets. We didn't really want to be a cybersecurity company. Yeah, I know. Sorry. But now you have to learn about it, or outsource it, or get third-party help from your pen testers, or where there's probably a lot of things you need to do all in the SDLC. Again, there's courses online. There's a lot of different ways you can learn about that. I'm not going to give a big long talk on it, but it's somebody somewhere at your company needs to know what that word means and understand that. And if you ask your sales rep for the thing that you're buying, hey, does your company follow SDLC? And your rep goes, I don't really know what that is. That's not a good sign. Just so you know, right? They should probably know what that is. And the answer should probably be yes, which it probably would be. And then, of course, then it comes into, well, how do I actually verify that yes is, it's easy to say yes to a lot of things, right? So, okay, the other thing is, should your, iron lung machine be built on Windows XP or CE from, 20 years ago? Probably not, right? I mean, maybe it's okay. I don't know. You see it a lot. I had LASIK surgery done a few years ago, and the machine that they used to take pictures of my eye before they did it was this really ancient-looking Windows XP machine, and I was like, it didn't give me a real feel-good, I'll tell you that. I didn't love the idea. I was like, so that thing's going to take high-tech images of my eyes? Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's the most state-of-the-art system we have, sir. But it's Windows XP. No. This machine this is $100,000. Okay. All right. Well, maybe you should use it. Windows 10 has DEP and ASLR and sandboxing and a lot of new security stuff that doesn't have. Oh, we can't help you with that, sir. It's kind of a bunny trail. But anybody, you ever try to have that conversation with somebody? If you go to your dentist and they go, oh, we need your driver's license, your credit card, your insurance card, your birth certificate, your social security number, and you're like, this is a two-person, business, right? It's a small company. Do you guys have it? Is there any chance this is... No. It's too hard. I've tried to have that conversation before, and they don't know what you're talking about, basically. If you try to ask them, are you going to secure my information? They're like, oh, yeah, we do all HIPAA compliance. You're like, no, I'm not asking you about compliance. I'm asking you, like, are you going to actually secure the image of my driver's license that you just took and put on your, like, laptop? Oh, probably not. But anyway, that's a bunny trail. I apologize for getting myself derailed there, but it made me think of it. So again, testing, static analysis, dynamic analysis, having a secure at company, all the sort of software security things that we've known about for a long time in this industry now have to be done everywhere. And that's a daunting task. That's an at scale. It's not nobody knows how to do this in this one domain. Yes, we do. We know how to do it in this one domain. But can we do it at scale for everything, everywhere that gets deployed all around the world? It's a harder question. Much harder question. So, you're going to need a lot of partners, right? It's going to take work, teamwork to get this whole thing done. It's going to take internal staff, external pen test partners. It's going to take all kinds of cooperation all across the industry to make this thing happen. The other thing you can do, and I do recommend that you do this if you're a vendor of these type of softwares, is you can make your stuff harder to find. That does help. So if you hide your firmware so hackers can't find it and look for vulnerabilities in it, that does give you essentially some security through obscurity. It gives you time, basically, is what it gives you. Hackers will get their hands on your firmware. They will eventually find the bugs, but it gives you a little bit of time. So a lot of vendors feel like security through obscurity is a worthwhile endeavor if it doesn't cost you a lot. And I would actually tend to agree with that. Most people in our industry poop on security through obscurity, but I actually say there is some value in it, basically, because it gives you time. So that's worth doing. The other thing that's worth doing is detection and logging, right? So what if, instead of always being behind, like so many companies are, what if you were ahead of the curve? What if you stood up a fake camera system, a fake building controller, a fake thing, and as soon as somebody connects to it and provides default credentials, like an attacker would, you get an alarm in your SIM tool that says somebody touched the honeypot. It's not that hard. It's actually really easy to do. It's very cost effective, very easy, and very effective. That's the one thing I love about it, because basically, I talked about hiding firmware, and these are some of the tools basically in deception. This is one of the products out there, this Canary tool that you can do it with. One of the problems we have in this industry is false positives, right? You'll see it a lot, especially in the next-gen endpoint space, right? Because it's really hard. You've got all these next-gen endpoint products who are going to detect advanced threats through amazing, analysis, alien technology, machine learning, and stuff like that. That's great. I'm all for it. I think it's fantastic. But you get a lot of false alarms, basically, because what happens is they're looking, instead of just signature-based was just this hash, this file equals vulnerability. Newer technology is more like, well, if I see, your browser launch another process like calc, then I think you've been owned, which you probably have been. But the thing is, maybe there's like some weird old ActiveX plugin that does that, right? And so you end up with a false positive. So there's a high potential for basically false positive with a lot of next-gen endpoint tools. So what I like about this cyber deception idea is it's pretty low on that. I mean, if somebody actually tried to touch your fake building controller and provided it default credentials, like nobody accidentally does that. There's not much chance of a false alarm in your SIM tool, basically, of that. So that's one of the reasons I'm kind of hip on the idea of cyber deception. I think it's kind of a way that, 5 minutes, I'm almost done, that you can kind of go on the quote-unquote offensive without actually, doing some weird hackback or something. You can kind of put yourself in a position to be ahead of the curve. So I'm hip on that. So to wrap up, it is a complex ecosystem. When you look at things like smart buildings, there's this huge, network of involved stakeholders. There's a whole external involving stakeholders like the building owner, operator, consulting engineer, architect, general contractor, manufacturer, integrator. There's like dozens of people that need to know about cybersecurity. Same thing for an internal stakeholder. Everything from your procurement to your legal to your safety to your finance to your IT to your audit. For big companies and big buildings, it's a very complex process. But I don't want to leave you with that. I don't want to leave you with the security is hard. It is hard. Your stuff's at risk. There's a lot of, potential for, all the stuff that we talked about. But I think with passion, diligence, and a commitment to doing the right thing, those that want to can secure all that stuff. So I'm going to leave you with that sort of positive messaging that it's possible, it's doable, you can do it. If you want to bounce ideas off somebody, there's my contact information for the business and myself. And I think I finished on time, unlike Atlas. Oh! Yeah, I know, right? So anyway, I'm just messing with you. Questions? I think I have some time for questions. Yeah, I have time. Yeah, definitely. Anybody have a comment, question, concern?
What would you do if you did set up a deception network and spot somebody? What then?
So the question was, if you did set up a honeypot or deception device and you caught somebody, what would you do?
Hack back!
Yes, you could hack back. I think mainly you want to have a plan in place. So most corporate enterprises that are sort of ready to respond to threats, they have sort of an escalation process where if there's a malware on an endpoint or they see an active threat or whatever it is, they have a process for who gets involved, who gets engaged, what do you do, what kind of artifacts do you gather, what systems do you shut down, how do you remediate. But it's a great question. And I don't know that there's necessarily always any specific one perfect right answer to that question, but at least you know. Right? At least you have a chance to respond and do the right thing. What's happening to most companies is they're infected for like a year before they know or whatever, or they finally figure out that all their data's on a torrent server somewhere or something, right? Like they find out when the FBI tells them, hey, it looks like we're seeing C2 traffic coming out of your network or something. Like they find out in all the wrong ways other than like we noticed it first. So it's a good question. And I think there's a lot of ways to handle it, but the main thing is you know. So good question. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead. How do you secure like software updates for anything, not automobile, but just automatic updates? Automatic updates. Yeah, how do you secure automatic updates? It's a good question, and I think that's something that as an industry, like 10 plus years ago, we really feared. We're like, there's no way I want my computer updating itself because, Lord knows what it might do. And there is some concern there. I think there is some valid fear and privacy concerns and things like that associated with it. I just think that basically as an industry we've decided it's worth the risk. Like there's a positive trade-off there. Because it, like Google Chrome or whatever, it keeps itself up to date. In general, it's more secure. Now, is it more private? Are there other issues? Probably, right? It doesn't solve everything, but at least you start with it's more secure than it used to be when it was an update. So I think it's a positive net gain, even though there are some potential concerns with, so to technically answer the question, they need to be signed, they need to come from a trusted source, certificate pinning. There's a lot of like technical answers to the question, but doing it I think is a good thing, and there's still a lot of devices that aren't doing it, so I would recommend that it at least be done. So, any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming.